Okay, so today I'm going to talk again about warning the people because he keeps putting out these fake ideas. These ideas that are built around the apostate church's teachings, not the teachings of Jesus Christ. So let's go ahead and have a look at what I'm going to read to you, what he's written, and I'm going to comment on it. I'm going to try to show you in Scripture where he is wrong. So let's start. He put this out yesterday. It says, there are a lot of people in my extended family and old friends who could care less to hear the gospel or my testimony about Jesus. Many of these people I have spoken to in the past and warned them. Warn them about what? About their sin? About Judgment Day? He doesn't say. But I do not continually go after people who reject the gospel and pester them. Interesting word to use, pester. We'll look at that a lot closer because he uses it repeatedly. If anyone cares to hear your thought on something or your opinion, they will ask you. In other words, shut up. So why did he tell them in the first place? Good question, right? Likewise, if someone is genuinely interested in the gospel, they will seek it out. Really? I don't think you're going to find that backed up in the scriptures. But no one values a pest. There's the word again, pester, pest. Like you're an insect, unwanted insect that people just want to kill because you annoy them. That's a pest. Jesus will never pester you. Now he's using it to Jesus. Jesus will never pester you or manipulate you. Now he gets stronger, even stronger and harsher wording, manipulate you. In order to get, he's doing that in order to manipulate you, to get you to agree with him on pester. He's used pester, pester 3 times, and now he uses an additionally strong word that you have to agree with because everyone believes that manipulation is wrong. So you have to agree that pestering is wrong because he's tacked on manipulate. He is an absolute manipulator par excellence, an excellent manipulator. And I showed that in the last video too. Jesus will never pester you or manipulate you into following him. Really? That's not what the testimonies bear out. Nearly every testimony that you hear about someone who has come to believe in Jesus Christ is where Jesus has pestered them and manipulated them, put them into some sort of death-threatening situation where they then finally give in to God. You don't call that manipulation? He is a gentleman. Jesus is a gentleman. Jesus is a gentleman. What is a gentleman? What do you mean by gentleman? This is a modern idea created in modern French culture. You don't even have any idea what you're talking about. We must be also. So women must be gentlemen also? Or just men? Because gentleman is a man. And it was about the gentry, the gentrified class, landowners. Yeah, it comes from class structure. It was a code of behavior that was agreed upon between the men who were owners of land, the plantation owners, the gentrified class, gentlemen. I know gentle comes from also the word gentle to be, but it's not, it's gentile, genteel. Genteel is from the gentry that owned the land. He has no idea what he's talking about. And so he's trying to say that Jesus is gentle. There is that same idea that I keep trying to remind you is not in the scriptures. Jesus is not like that. Jesus is not some sort of pink puffy clouds and unicorns. And that's what he's getting to here. Although he said the opposite in the past. And yet here he wants to make Jesus into a gentleman in order to get you to agree with some more of his false doctrine. Was Jesus a gentleman when he sat there braiding a whip? His own whip that he's going to use to whip men to make them leave the temple and then overturn the tables? Like, not overturn them, like throw them over with the things on them that don't belong to him. And he's throwing them over. And he's chasing men out, hitting them with a whip. That's a gentleman? Really? You think so? That's a gentleman? Or calling the Pharisees the sons of Satan, the sons of the devil? That's a gentleman? Really? You think Jesus... What about when Jesus returns the second time? Is he a gentleman then too? Because if he's a gentleman now, he's got to be a gentleman then, but he's going to be executing war and killing so many people. The blood will come up to the bridles on the horse. And when he's done, what's he do? What a gentleman does? Calling the birds of the air to come feast on the flesh of the generals and the great men? For the banquet of God has come? That's a gentleman? You're messed up in your head. If you think Jesus is a gentleman, you're messed up in your head. What about where Jesus tells a parable? Okay, Luke 18, 1 through 8. And I know what you're going to protest with, those of you who agree with this warning the people guy. I know what you're going to protest about already in advance, and I've got an answer for you. Let's go ahead and read it. It's Luke 18, 1 through 8. Then he spoke a parable to them that men always ought to pray and not lose heart. Men ought to always pray and not lose heart, saying, there was in a certain city a judge who did not fear God nor regard man. He didn't care about men and he didn't fear God. Now there was a widow in that city, and she came to him saying, get justice for me from my adversary. She had an enemy who was hurting her, somehow was hurting her, and she wanted justice. And he would not for a while. But afterward he said within himself, though I do not fear God nor regard man, yet because this widow troubles me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. That is pestering. That is exactly pestering. And right here, Jesus is telling this parable. Jesus is telling us to pester. Right here. The example is of a widow who is pestering a judge who does not fear God or regard men, and he's not willing to dispense justice on her behalf. And so she's pestering him because she's on the right side to demand justice. And so it says, then the Lord said, hear what the unjust judge said. So Jesus said, hear what the unjust judge said. And shall God not avenge his own elect? So hear what he said to the widow. And shall God not avenge his own elect, who cry out day and night to him, though he bears long with them? Meaning, if an unjust judge is willing to avenge a widow for justice because she's threatening to weary him out, do you think that God will not avenge us, whom he has selected? It's actually the word selected, not elect. Elect's not in the Bible. Who he has selected, who cry out day and night to him. Do you cry out day and night to God? Is there some injustices being done to you that you're crying out day and night to God about? Do you think he's not going to avenge you and make justice happen? Of course he will. I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? Now that's interesting. That's interesting. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? That's an interesting way to end that. Do you have faith in God? Do you really? Because those who really have faith in God are the select. Those are the ones who cry out day and night, and God will avenge speedily. Are you persuaded in God? Do you have that persuasion through Jesus Christ in God the Father? Because if you do, and you cry out day and night, he will avenge you and speedily. Cry out day and night. And if you say, but I do have faith, I am absolutely persuaded, and I'm not avenged. Well, look at the whole thing. Crying out day and night. Day and night, crying out. Crying out. Not just mentioning in passing. Crying out day and night. Avenge me, O Lord. Avenge me, avenge me, avenge me, O Lord. Bring justice. So you want to argue with me that, well, that's with God. You're supposed to pester God, but you're not supposed to pester people. Yeah? Is that what you think? Yeah? Okay. Let's look again at what he said here. We're talking about warning the people, right? That was a great mini sermon, right? That we just had on pestering God and getting answers. Now, he says here, I do not continually go after people who reject the gospel and pester them. If anyone cares to hear your thought on something or your opinion, they will ask you. Really? Let's see what Jesus had to say about that. Okay, so if we turn to Jesus' first public teaching, which is the Sermon on the Mount, then we find an answer to this, to correct his error, his doctrinal error that he's creating here. Because it is doctrine that he's creating here. He's creating a reason for practicing a certain way, right? What he thinks is the Christian life. Well, let's go ahead and have a look at what Jesus says here. Blessed are those, this is Matthew 5:10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So first off, if you are righteous, if you truly are righteous, you stopped sinning, you're following Jesus, you're doing the pleasure of the Father. If you are righteous and your family and your friends are persecuting you because of it, then it's because you're righteous and you're blessed. And you're going to complain about that, or you're going to start shutting your mouth. Yeah? You're not going to let them see your good works that you do. And now I've got people running away because they think, good works? Oh, what? He thinks we should do good works? Jesus says we should. We're not talking about how we're saved at this point. We're talking about the fact that we should do good works. Let's go ahead with what Jesus said. Not me, what Jesus said. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you. When they revile and persecute you. They revile you. They consider you a villain. They revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. If you're sharing the gospel with them, the true gospel, we're not talking about the apostate gospels. If you're sharing the true gospel with them and they revile you and persecute you and speak all kinds of evil against you, it's because of Jesus. So what are you upset about? And what are you complaining about? It's not you, it's Jesus that they hate. And what, you didn't think that you were going to be his ambassador? You didn't think that you were going to take the brunt of the blows from people who hate Jesus? Jesus is already in heaven. He already took the blows. So now you've got to stand in the gap. Because you're the one out there on the front lines. And yes, that is part of what we're called to. Jesus says right here, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you. Blessed are you when they say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad. That's not what warning the people is doing. He's not rejoicing and being exceedingly glad in it. He's altering his strategy of how to live the Christian life by hiding his light under a bushel, by getting rid of the saltiness of the salt. We'll see what Jesus has to say about that next, because Jesus already predicted people to do that in reaction to persecution and being reviled. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. If you read the Old Testament, you know that that's what's going to happen to you. They're going to persecute you, just like they persecuted the prophets who came before you, who were doing the same thing, preaching the gospel. Yes, preaching the gospel. The gospel was preached even all the way back at the time of the Hebrews in the desert. It says so. It says they heard the same gospel that's been preached to us. It's in Hebrews. You'll see that in a video I'm going to be producing maybe today or tomorrow. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. You're the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned again? How shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Warning the people has become unflavored salt, unsalty salt. It's just rock then. And he's only good for throwing out on the ground and being trampled underfoot by men, because he's lost his saltiness. Let's keep going. You are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket. They don't light a lamp and then conceal the light. For what purpose? Why'd you light the lamp then? Warning the people. Why was your lamp lit if you're going to hide it? You're afraid of persecution? Of being reviled? Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. You don't hide your light. You don't get rid of the saltiness of the salt. For what reason? For what reason? Then why would you put salt on your food? Why would you put salt on your wound? It has no power anymore. You've gotten rid of the power of the salt. You've gotten rid of the reason for the light. Because you're afraid of being reviled by your family and old friends. It says, let your light so shine before men. It's a command. You must shine your light before men, that they may see your good works. I didn't say it, Jesus did. That they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. You think good works is not necessary for salvation? How about causing others to glorify God who is in heaven, that they might be saved when they hear the gospel? They see your good works. They see the value of being a Christian, that you're bringing good into the world by action, practical good, not just blah, 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 talking all the time. If that's what you're doing, warning the people, I'm talking about the guy who runs Warning the People channel. If that's what you're doing with your friends and your families, just blah, 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 no wonder they don't want to listen to you. Are you doing anything useful for them? Good. Are you doing anything useful or good for those who are helpless, who don't have the opportunities you do? And then letting your friends and family know, not hiding it, so they might glorify God. But if you're just blabbering on and condemning them and not doing anything useful, why would they glorify God? Why would they do anything but reject you? And yet, if they reject you because of Christ, well, then it's because of Christ. But if they reject you because all you do is talk, they don't see any actions. They don't see any change. They don't see any good coming from it. Well, that's different, see? Pester. Jesus says, you must shine your light before men. Is that pestering? Maybe. They might not like it. Well, you know they're not going to like it when you're telling them about Jesus, when you're telling them about the Father and obeying the Father and stopping sin, and that Jesus came to help so that you can do that. You know they're not going to like it. It says right here, blessed are they when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. They're going to consider you pestering. They're going to consider you a pest. And yet, what are you going to do? Shut your mouth? You're going to stop telling it? You're going to start talking about the weather only? And what? Politics? Then what are you? You're no better than anyone else. There's no difference. You're not the salt of the earth. You're not the light of the world. You've lost your saltiness and are good only to be trampled underfoot by men. And they will. It's a shame. It's a real shame. But no one values a pest. Of course they don't value you if they think you're pestering them. That's a stupid thing to say. The very definition of the word is that way. But just because someone considers you a pest doesn't mean you don't have value. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. Because they will consider us pests. They will think that we are pestering them when we consistently and persistently tell them about Jesus Christ, about the Holy Spirit, about our Father in heaven and becoming a child of God. When we're constantly referring to the testimony of God, they will think we are a pest. You're pestering me. Stop it. No, I won't stop it. What are they going to do? Maybe beat you up. Maybe falsely accuse you in court. Who knows what they're going to do? Maybe stop talking to you. Cut off all communication with you. Because they don't want to hear the word of God from Jesus Christ, and especially not through the testimony of God, the Bible. Jesus will never pester you or manipulate you into following him, which is absolutely not true. Nearly every testimony that you hear people give, God has manipulated them into following him. He still gives them a choice, but he pressures them. He puts them even in dire situations where they are pressured so much that they give in. Not everyone gives in, but people do give in to that pressure of the manipulation. Now, manipulation has a very strongly negative connotation to it, so I hesitate to use that with God. But manipulate literally means just to use your hands to control something, like manual control over something. Yeah, God does that. He does, absolutely does. Daniel prophesied and told Nebuchadnezzar that he was going to lose his kingdom and he was going to be driven out into the fields with the animals, and dew would fall on him and he would not have his senses about him at all. And that's exactly what happened. Nebuchadnezzar was manipulated by God. He stood on his palace and he looked out and he said, "Did I not create all this?" And that very day, he lost his senses and was driven out into the field to sleep with the animals for long. I think it was a year. It was a long time. And then finally, he looked up to heaven and his senses came back to him and he praised the God of heaven. Then he issued an edict that everyone would also worship the God of Daniel as the God of heaven. You tell me that's not manipulation. He didn't just give Nebuchadnezzar a choice and say, you need to either do this or don't do this. You need to make a choice. No. He drove him mad into becoming an animal and losing his kingdom in order to make him worship him. And you say that God does not manipulate? What about with Moses and Pharaoh? Repeatedly terrifying Pharaoh to try to force him to let his people go. Let God's people go. Let my people go. And that's not manipulation. Really? That's definitely manipulation. God manipulates. He does. He does. He pressures. He puts people under pressure to decide. Now, we don't use deceitful means in order to cause people to choose to follow Jesus. Absolutely not. But God didn't use deceitful means either. But he used the power that he had at hand to move people in the right direction. And you can call that manipulating. If you consistently try to convince someone that the Bible is true, that Jesus really did die and raise from the dead, if you persistently keep trying to convince them, is that manipulation? Some people act like that's manipulation today, and they accuse people of manipulation when that's all they're doing is trying to convince them of something that they know is true. That's not manipulation. You're sick in the head. If you think that's manipulation, you're sick in the head. That's not manipulation. That's persuasion. They're not the same thing. And if someone persistently keeps doing that, you've got to stop and ask yourself, why does that person believe this is true so much so that he will not stop trying to persuade me, to convince me? Remember, the word for faith in the Greek means to be persuaded. So all you're doing is trying to give them faith. All you're doing is trying to make them have faith. That's all you're doing. And so when these voices say you've got to stop that, they're trying to stop you from giving other people faith, from giving other people biblical persuasion and calling it manipulation. This man is wicked. This man is a false teacher, constantly developing his doctrine from his mouth, from those lying lips of his, in order to subterfuge the gospel, to subterfuge the Holy Spirit, to undermine God and his people. As we spread the gospel, as we persuade men to believe and follow Jesus Christ and glorify our Father who is in heaven. Warning the people is just an example, because there are so many of them who do the same thing. But he's very crafty, very deceitful, very manipulative. Yeah, because he's trying to trick you into doing it by getting you to agree with one thing and tacking it onto the thing that he wants you to agree with that you wouldn't normally agree with. He does it a lot. That's his style. So be warned. I'm warning you against warning the people. The channel, Warning the People. I'm warning you against warning the people. Stay away, because you will be lost. If you listen to him, even if you don't accept it when you're listening to him, you will eventually take some of those things in and you will be lost. Don't say you weren't warned.